Smoke and Blood by Cornconic. You aren't actually going to do it, right? Ralph sighed and stared off into the distance. The sun was setting peacefully along the horizon, casting great orange waves across the sky. I don't know, maybe? Emma furrowed her brow and placed her hand on Ralph's shoulder. Ralph, look at me. Ralph dragged his gaze to meet Emma's. This is dumb. She spoke slowly, nodding her head with each syllable. This could get us in a lot of trouble. Just say no. We can leave. I'll put on some pizza when we get back. But Derek said... I don't care what Derek said, Emma whispered. If he's going to be a jerk and not give us a ride home, we'll walk. I'd rather freeze to death out here than spend another minute sitting in his musty convertible anyway. Ralph glanced over to the car. It sat at the edge of a field, polished red with black frames painted across the bonnet. Its reduced suspension meant it hung a few inches off the ground, on carbon black wheels. Ralph had always wanted to give it a spin, despite the smell. It would be a substantial change from his shitbox Toyota, which was currently sitting in his parents' garage collecting dust. Not too far away, a log fire was burning. Derek was sat quietly beside it on the dirt, twiddling his pocket knife between his fingers. His spiked hair stood firmly upright, while Emma's long locks flickered wildly in the breeze. The night was raw and icy, with an eye-watering wind that seemed to whistle along the grass for miles. My dad will fucking disown me if he finds out about this, Emma whispered, clasping her hands over her arms. She shivered slightly. The biting cold was intensifying as the minutes passed by. Hey, lovebirds! Derek suddenly interrupted. You coming back over here, or am I going to be a third wheel for the rest of the night? Emma gave Ralph one last pleading look. Together they shuffled away from the tree, Ralph sticking his hands out into the warmth of the fire. So, Ralph, Derek continued, taking a sip from his beer can. You finally manned up, or you gonna pussy out again like you did at the theme park? Ralph scowled. Man, fuck you, Derek. You knew I didn't want to ride the spiral of doom. Why don't you do it anyway? You're such a tough guy. Derek snorted, a wide grin plastered on his face. His defined jawline stuck out in the glowing moonlight as he leaned back into his elbows. Oh, I have. In other places, of course. Quite a few times. Even make it on the news every now and then. In fact, I came here just a few days ago, scoping this place out. No traffic, no signs of civilization for miles. Been that way for as long as I remember, since I used to come here as a kid. Derek let out a loud burp. He stared noticeably at Emma's cleavage as he lit up a cigarette, cupping his hands over the flame to protect it from the wind. Emma recoiled in disgust, and Derek let out a smug chuckle at her reaction. Look, point is, if you want to keep hanging out with me, Ralph, you gotta do it. It's like an initiation thing. If you're that scared, then think about it this way. 80% of arson cases go unsolved, so the odds are already in your favor. Take that number and keep in mind how the cops around this place are a bunch of bumblefuck morons, and I'd say you got a 95% chance of getting away with this. It's not like we're burning a fucking church down or anything, it's just a bunch of stupid trees. And if you're still not motivated enough, the alternative is me hopping out of here and leaving you and your lady stranded in the desolate countryside, all alone and hopeless. I hear the local wildlife gets pretty mean around this time of the night. Derek mimicked the wolf howling, pointing his head up towards the sky. It's Emma, you stuck-up asswipe, not the lady, Emma responded. We don't need this, and we don't want it. We're leaving, whether you give us a ride or not. She stood up and began walking towards the road, gesturing for Ralph to follow her. Derek shot him a hard stare as Ralph felt his brain being pulled in two opposite directions. Hold on, babe. I just need to pee. Then we'll go, I promise. Fine, make it quick. I don't want to stay out here any longer, Emma replied. She stopped walking and folded her arms, glaring at Derek. Derek winked at Ralph as he slipped away, the soft sounds of the fire fading into silence. Approaching the cluster of tall oak trees up ahead, Ralph fished around in his jean pocket, making sure it wasn't visible from the campfire. Eventually he pulled out a lighter. A small flame popped into existence as the flick of his thumb, dancing in the air. Hesitating, Ralph gazed aimlessly across the tree trunks, checking for any signs of life. Nothing. Not a bird in the branches, nor a fox in the bushes, and no sounds either, no tweets from up above or rustles in the bushes below. How odd, Ralph thought. With a sigh, he reached into his other pocket, producing a can of lighter fluid. Unscrewing the lid, he doused the base of the tree with the oily substance, stepping backwards until he was a safe distance away. Emma's piercing eyes were stained in his mind as he contemplated his decision. Maybe now he could finally put an end to Derek's relentless hazing and keep his dignity. Besides, Derek was right anyway. It was just a bunch of stupid trees. How bad could it possibly get? Tossing the lighter at the tree, Ralph shielded his eyes as a huge fireball rose into the air, engulfing the night in a cloud of orange and yellow. The gas was singed and inky black, the leaves of the trees instantly withering in the extreme heat.
"What the fuck, Ralph? Have you lost your fucking mind? I thought we were leaving!"
Emma yelled, running over to the scene. Ralph looked past his girlfriend's aggravated frown to Derek. A pleased expression hung annoyingly on Derek's clean-cut face, the fire reflecting in his eyes. "Jeez, Ralph, I didn't know you had it in you." "Good job, my man. We'll leave soon. I just want to stay and watch the fireworks for a minute." An unearthly scream shot through their ears. Ralph clasped his hands over his head instinctively, dropping to his knees in shock. Emma screamed and almost fell to the ground as Derek stayed planted to the spot, wincing through the noise. Another ear-piercing cry echoed across the fields. Ralph stared at the trees in horror, the heat of the inferno radiating against his skin. Horrible realization crept over him. There was no ash, no peeling bark, no collapsing branches. The roar of the fire was mixed with a wetter, dripping sound. A pool of sickly brown and green was gathering at the base of the trees, inching closer to Ralph's rugged boots. The trees were not burning, not sagging and falling like pieces of wood. The trees were melting.
"What the fuck is happening?"
Emma cried, jumping to Ralph's arms. The pair turned to Derek. Slowly, he began to back away.
"I'm sorry, you guys. I really am."
For the first time since Ralph could remember, there was fear on his face. Real fear. His smarmy, confident tone had dropped to a lowly whimper.
"I had to bring you here. They wouldn't leave me alone."
"Derek, what the fuck are you talking about?" Ralph shouted.
"It's the trees. They're not trees. They're... I don't know what they are. I told you, I've been here before. They were just trees for the longest time. I swear to God, they were just trees, and then they weren't anymore. They spoke to me. Told me I had to bring people to them. They followed me home, Ralph. What was I supposed to do?"
"Derek, Emma screamed in pain. The melted substance had wrapped around her ankle and was dragging her into the fire.
"Ralph, help me! I don't want to die!"
Ralph looped his arms around Emma's shoulders and heaved, straining against the substance pull.
"I've got you!"
He cast his head over his shoulders to Derek, begging him with his eyes to help. Derek shook his head in bewilderment. He seemed to contemplate the action for just a second, then turned and began running towards the convertible. Ralph cursed under his breath. He was rapidly losing his grip. The slime was just too strong. Emma yelled once more as another ear-shattering scream roared out of the fire. The substance was climbing up her leg, engulfing her skin inch by inch. They shared one final look into each other's eyes before his hands finally slipped, and Emma toppled to the ground, crying and babbling as she was drawn into the blaze, disappearing behind a wall of smoke. Ralph slowly backed away from the fire. The substance was rapidly advancing in all directions, as the trees quickly warped and lost their shape. Turning from the fire, he saw Derek was already a quarter of the way back to the car.
"Derek, you motherfucker!"
Ralph bellowed. He broke into a wild sprint, carried by sheer adrenaline alone. Derek was fast, but in the heat of the moment, Ralph was faster. In not even a minute, the pair were in an arm's reach of each other. Ralph pounced on Derek's back, sending them both spiraling to the ground. His vision went blurry as he knocked his head on the dirt, staying just clear enough to make out Derek scrambling to his feet and delivering a hard kick directly to his temple. The entire world was spinning as Derek crawled beneath him and locked his muscly arm around his neck.
"You never deserved that, bitch, you know that?"
Derek spoke as he tightened his grip. Ralph choked and gasped for air beneath the power of Derek's headlock. With that banging body and those luscious lips, she would have always been better off with me. But no. She clearly had a thing for worthless losers who aren't worth the phlegm in my mouth. Ralph tried to force out a word with no avail. He felt his consciousness start to wither as he flailed and squirmed under Derek's titanium grip, the oxygen cells in his brain popping one by one. You always thought you were the shit, Ralph. Being at her side 24/7, making a big show of how in love with her you were. It was only supposed to be you. Now she's gone, and all because you insisted on dragging her out here with you. On the verge of passing out, Ralph's hand scraped along the dirt, brushing along a certain object. Something that stood out from the grass that surrounded it. Something hard and sharp. Goodbye, Ralph, Derek concluded. I'm sure no one will miss you. Derek's words were cut short as Ralph stabbed the pocket knife into his side. Instantly, his grip was released, and Ralph rolled onto the dirt beside him, panting and wheezing for air. Derek grunted and wailed in pain, gripping his waist and lunging for him once more. Ralph screamed and swiped the knife across his neck. Derek collapsed sideways, blood spurting over his face and shirt. His eyes grew pale and milky, and his large, heaving breaths slowly receded as blood filled his throat. Slowly, the body grew limp as he stared at Ralph, arms still outstretched towards him upon the blood-soaked grass. Ray lay on his back, staring up at the sky. It was a beautiful night, the stars and constellations fully visible. Part of him wanted to fall asleep right then and there, but he knew he couldn't. He had to keep going. The convertible was only a little bit away, and the melted substance was still spreading like liquid metal. It slid across the grass with slight sizzle, scorching everything it touched. Ralph got up to his feet, still coughing, and started running shakily, wiping the blood from his eyes. The wet squelches under his feet turned to soft crumbles as he stepped onto the gravel road. He opened the convertible's door with a firm pull and climbed inside. The keys were already in the ignition, waiting to be turned by his shaking hand. He looked back over to the field. The trees were gone, as if they'd never been there at all, and all that was left was the substance. Ralph heard it whispering indecipherable things into the distance. Many voices all conglomerated into one. In the distance, he saw a figure walk out of the fire. It was Emma, except not quite. Her body was now a slimy, wet husk, dripping and drooping as it crept towards Derek's body, its joints not quite in the right places anymore. Ralph saw it look up at him and smile. Almost that same smile Ralph had cherished so many other times. The slime washed over Derek's body, and Ralph stared in disbelief as it brought itself to its feet, sharing Derek's same stocky frame and towering height, but corrupted in a way that Ralph never thought possible. His two former friends joined hands together and stared at him from afar, looking backwards into the fire, still staring and smiling as their bodies turned to nothing, engulfed in the slime. Ralph turned the keys in the ignition and floored it. What do you think? I don't know, he's covered in blood, but he seems mostly uninjured. Just a few scrapes and bruises from the crash. Don't smell any alcohol. Looks like a potential druggie to me. Yeah, all I smell is gasoline. I mean, he was driving on the dirt road with no streetlights, for crying out loud. It was doomed from the start. And the blood? Maybe hit an animal or something. There are a few wolves around these parts. Them fuckers are bigger than you think up close. Ralph groaned, his brain full of fog. Can you hear me, son? The words echoed through his brain. He moaned and raised his hand to his face. Was it all just a dream? Try not to move too much. We'll get you out of there. Ralph opened his eyes. He was upside down, still in the convertible, hanging loosely by his seatbelt. The windscreen was smashed and broken glass was scattered along the roof. Slowly, he felt his body being hoisted out of the car. Stinging rays of sunlight dazzled his eyes. A dusty police car was parked on the other side of the road, its lights flashing. Ralph squinted at the faces above. A mustached, middle-aged man and a younger, less wrinkled officer stared down at him. Can you hear me, boy? Ralph nodded slowly. Good. Then listen. 3 teens around your age went missing last night in the area. The older one began. 2 boys and a girl. We believe it's linked to the recent forest fire. You know anything about that, son? The words were still incredibly hard to process. Ralph mumbled half a word, letting out a cough. We saw 2 of the missing people before. One was a boy and one was a girl walking through one of the fields. But we lost them. You're Derek Woody, yeah? This looks to be your car here. Ralph let out a confused grunt. The younger officer sighed, annoyed.
Are you aware that you were issued a strict driving ban last week for the risk of endangerment with this automobile?
He gestured to the totaled convertible. It's not.
This is hopeless. The younger officer butted in. Starting fires now, are we, Derek? Roping others into petty crimes? You knew you couldn't drive this car, now look where it's got you.
He sighed and scratched his head.
God damn it, kids your age still shouldn't be doing this kind of shit.
Maybe it's not his car. We should call an ambulance. He might be bleeding internally or have brain damage or something fucked up like that.
Alright, fine. There's pictures down at the station anyway. We'll know for sure when we get back.
The older officer pulled a walkie-talkie out of his belt and began to speak into it. Station, this is Unit 4. We have found one of the missing teens and are requesting an ambulance support. We found one of the boys in a car crash. Looks to be somewhat stable condition, but maybe suffering from less explicit injuries. We'll report back to the station to identify... He stopped dead. The officer tensed up as the 2 men stared at something in Ralph's peripheral vision. Slowly, he rotated himself to be able to see. An identical-looking police car was parked directly behind the old one.
Where the hell did that thing come from?
Ralph tried to scream, but his throat was too coarse. He could only watch as the older officer stuck his hand out towards the car, as Derek and Emma's mutilated bodies walked out into the open from behind a circle of those cold, lifeless trees. If you like this video, please consider subscribing. And if you're an animal lover like me, please consider donating to the World Land Trust, a charity that aims to help wildlife through buying land, preventing development, and helping endangered species.